Beck. Thanks for staying with us. You're listening to Planet Green Trees. Call numbers 1-347-326-9626. We're very excited to have our next guest, Dale Sky Jones from Oaksterdam University. Welcome, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Thank you for being here.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. It sounds like your previous guest is definitely on the right track and doing good things, so valuable time.
That's true, but you as well are an exciting person for us to talk to. We know that your organization that you've been involved with is like a household name in the cannabis and medical cannabis community. I had mentioned earlier I went to there's some classes in Flint, Michigan, and there's like 100 people in this small room from all over the Midwest who had, appreciated having like a more local place to come and learn. But tell our listeners, how you would describe Oaksterdam's, origins and up to, the most recent years, like what its direction's been and kind of successes it's had.
Sure, and Michigan is I hold fondly in my heart as one of our satellite campuses. We've gone out and taught well over 1,000 students in Michigan, and many of them Michiganders, many of them from, as you said, throughout the Midwest. We were founded first at the end of 2007 by Richard Lee here in Oakland, California, and we started as talk about a small room. It was about a broom closet. We could fit 14 people. And it started out just trying to teach people their personal rights and responsibilities having to do with medical cannabis, here in California, because we were trying to get folks involved with their local government, because the only way that we're going to change the momentum and end marijuana prohibition is to start educating people and teaching them the rights and having them stand up for themselves and others. And so it started under the idea of, well, what you want to know is how to grow good medicine, and what we would like to see is for you to get involved, be it on just your local city council level, or, many of our students, I'm proud to say, have gone on to change state laws. So it was kind of a trade-off, and the phone just kept ringing and ringing and ringing, and so we opened up a Los Angeles campus, and it kept ringing, and we opened up a North Bay campus, and it kept ringing. And then Michigan changed its laws. And, it's funny, I had a few people say, Hawaii is a medical marijuana state. Shouldn't you have gone there? But, Michigan,
right, better winters for sure.
My goodness. Well, at least I could have used a good excuse for, a working vacation, right? But no, silly me. I would actually rather go to the heartland. And, not only can we affect and reach a lot more people in the center of our country, but the Michigan law itself was actually written similarly to the California law. So we thought, we've got the same opportunities in Michigan for, taking the next step with business, dispensaries, and caregiving that a lot of folks manage to do in California. But we would actually like to try to save you a decade of trauma in the process. So it just made natural sense to try to go to Michigan. And our first class actually had over 300 students in it. Our second class had nearly 300. And then our third, I think was the one that you attended, for about 100 students. And it's truly remarkable, the depth and breadth, the diversity. We had collared priests, we had medical doctors, nurses, retired law enforcement, military, professional real estate agents and chefs, average Joes, folks that graduated MIT, folks that never graduated high school. And they all have something in common. First is they're an outcast or choose to closet themselves because of cannabis consumption at some point in their past. They've realized the most dangerous thing about pot is getting caught with it, and they've decided to educate themselves. And many of these folks have gone on to change laws, as I mentioned, or just simply help the zeitgeist. This is the civil rights revolution of our time. We did not invent racism, but we certainly institutionalized it with the drug war. And it's time to start disassembling the way that we have ensconced racism in our actual laws of how we're managing our own people, that it's time to start building more schools than prisons for the first time in 2 decades. And so part of what we do is teach people how to grow medical quality cannabis. But most of what we do is teach people their rights and empower them to improve their own life, because really this is a lifestyle issue, from taking control of your own medicine to having successful law enforcement encounters. So we provide quality training for the cannabis industry, and that could be just someone trying to be a qualified patient or someone trying to regulate it. Well,
I'd actually be surprised. I would have thought that it had been around a lot longer, seriously, because the material that the organization of how it was doesn't seem like it had been like, an entrenched concept for a long time. So I'm a little bit surprised, but what's interesting to me is that obviously the start of this was at a time in California when there had already been a medical marijuana law for 5-7 years, right?
Well, the first law was passed in '96, and we opened at the end of 2007. So, you're looking at about a decade of us making quite a few mistakes here in California. Quite a few. And,
sure.
And in fact, we became the redheaded stepchildren of the country to say this is what not to do. Now, the reality of the situation is this is not the Wild West. I mean, there's lots of fun with fear tactics and saying, oh no, you're going to end up like California. Well, California, they're not standing out on street corners here with Uzis and shooting off each other with dispensaries. It's actually the lack of regulation by the cities that caused that problem, and then the fervor with the press. But Michigan, even though there's been tremendous setbacks in Michigan with respect to the law, there is also tremendous opportunity for moving forward in Michigan with future laws.
I agree. I was going to make this one point, though. I'm a lawyer in Michigan, and I have gone through this experience of just a completely, trying to give advice in a period of time that is new, and laws are obviously changing in the interpretations and whatnot. But as I sat there in my office, I would hear people come in and, think about different ways that they could be involved in an industry, be involved in a business, help change the thoughts on medical cannabis and cannabis in general. But the most effective has always been the education aspect, educating, getting the message out, empowering people for, directing them how they can behave and help bring about change. And that, to me, was one of the things that stood out more in the whole, the manual that comes along with the classes. It really is a thorough explanation of individual liberties and how to be safe, and just become more knowledgeable about things that have been so, distorted in our public, in public media. So I can't say enough to how many times I read the book just in terms of gathering baseline knowledge about various factors. And I think it is something that if anyone doesn't have it, and if it's still available, I don't know, but it is a worthwhile periodical to have in your library if you're going to be engaged in any kind of cannabis or medical cannabis related stuff. And I say that without any sponsorships or like that. I do honestly mean that.
I appreciate that.
So Michigan was a place that took a lot of interest, and I want to just, of all of the types of businesses, because it is a business to a certain degree, in fact that, there's an expansion of, your school, your university, and it's not one that would lend itself to even concerns from the law enforcement community at all, because it really is First Amendment issues. It's teaching and educating. Did you have any issues about that in your development in California, or any, not dealing anything about marijuana growing transfer? I'm just saying, as it began to develop, did you ever have any legal challenges to the evolution of the school, the educational institution?
Indeed, a rather large one, I would say. And it's funny because I remember back in the day in 2008, waiting for the jackboots to kick in the door. And the only time the cops actually came to us was once when they were looking for a kidnapping victim. It had nothing to do with anything. The jackboots came in the door on April 2nd of 2012. We suffered a federal raid with a multi-agency attack on all of Richard Lee's businesses. And I think a lot of it stemmed from the attempt via Prop 19 to, legalize consumption for adults of cannabis back in 2010. It became a political issue. And it turns out that it seems that our raid was actually instigated by the IRS, not the DEA or the U.S. attorneys. And that means a couple of things. It means it's actually good news for our students because it means that they're not sharing any information about our students with the DEA. They're not allowed to. So there's the good news, that anything that the IRS took, the IRS keeps. The bad news is they took everything except the office furniture. And so we were left on the afternoon of April 2nd with nothing. And when you are an information education-based institution, them taking your computers and, therefore your curriculum and your ability to do simple things like generate certificates of completion, we got the wind knocked out of us. We got knocked down. There were 108 union jobs that were lost that day. And it's unfortunate in the bigger picture that tax-paying, participating individuals with our economy turned into takers overnight for needing financial assistance. There's over 5 families with kids under 2, mine being one of them. And so we lose health insurance and everything else in that one fell swoop. And it took a tremendous volunteer effort by our instructors, by some of our former staff, and by just new volunteers that were either former students or just passersby on the street that were suddenly inspired to help. And teachers taught for months without pay. A lot of the staffers volunteered most of their time, and the students kept coming back. And it's always been our students that have been the secret to our success. But here we were with all these students that had paid, the old administration expecting to get educated, waiting for the last class of their semester in 2 days, and waiting for, the weekend seminar that they've already purchased plane tickets for. And so we managed to pull it off.
Clarify this.
Rumors of our demise are exaggerated. We actually managed to teach every damn class, hell or high water. So,
great. Let me ask you this. I want to be clarified because I know, and I am skeptical of all that I read and hear, and especially because it involves government alleging behavior. But there are multiple locations that were hit, all businesses related to Richard Lee. Were the allegations, in the affidavit or the reasons, were they related to the teaching of medical cannabis and cannabis growing alone, or did it involve allegations of medical transfers or dispensing cannabis or what have you? I'm
glad you reminded me, because part of what I was going to circle back to is the fact that now we are simply a First Amendment fight. But the whole time that the school was owned by Richard Lee, he had an LLC and we were all DBAs, so we were kind of cousins. We were all owned by the same individual organization. And so, Richard was the leader. He was representing all of us as the leader. And when the raid happened, he retired and all of the individuals dispersed. And so I took the school and the museum to try to keep it alive. Someone else took the gift shop. Someone else took the dispensary. And none of us are affiliated anymore, although I should say that I did just buy the gift shop. And by the way, yes, our binders are available if anyone is interested. And so, we still have the Oaksterdam.com, and we're doing that. To answer your most recent question, it's still a sealed affidavit. They will not tell us what they were looking for or why. We have rumor that it was a grand jury investigation that triggered the raid. They didn't have enough information to indict Richard Lee. They asked for more information, the nature of which you can only get in the process of a raid, because they're worried about them trying to hide something. The irony is this is the guy that's still driving like a 1990-something Bonneville, living in a one-bedroom/studio apartment. He already spent all his money on Prop 19. So, they came in and then they just didn't really find anything. And so I'll point out that over a year later, the charges are not filed, the affidavit is still sealed, and nothing continues to happen. They really can't go after us for First Amendment issues. If they were to go after anything, it would have been either the growing or the selling of cannabis, which he was permitted to do under state law, or they would, try to get him on some IRS faux pas. But I'd like to point out, again, over a year later, all he got was audited. We really were doing what we said we were doing, paying our taxes and telling the truth. So, surprise.
Well, this is not an uncommon scenario that it gets a little bit more complex when there's multiple entities involved. But despite whatever the federal government, my experience has been they don't care whatever the structure of the corporations are, sub companies or what have you. They see it all as if there's one piece of it that's something that they don't approve of or calling criminal, then it all is, and that's how they operate under those theories. And they'll throw a huge net out there and see whatever they can find. It's also not uncommon that they don't know what to do after the raids, even though they've got all this property and other things that, and after sometimes they don't charge, sometimes the state will pick it up, the state may not want to. I'm just speaking generally, but
many times it's a smash and grab with a badge, and they do nothing until you ask for your stuff back.
Right.
And that's really, it's the unfortunate part of it, that we've got a Fourth Amendment. It's horrendous what we're doing with the Fourth Amendment right now with search and seizure on private property, and this is how local departments are actually filling their budgets, is by how many people can we go out to bus to take their homes and property and bank accounts.
I know I was just having this conversation, a case where they raided a client of mine who had a dispensary and then created an affidavit, which is really a lot of boilerplate language, suggesting that in their history of drug trafficking and all the investigations they've done, people that are involved will keep records at their home, with no other evidence that anything would be at the individual's home, suggesting that anyone that gets arrested as a business is subject to a search of their home, which is just ridiculous, for no other reason. The change, the determining factor for me was that they have not experienced drug trafficking with people that are openly and obviously interacting and transferring cannabis to people with a card. That's not where they're talking. Like, their experience and history that may lead them to that, whether it's right or wrong, is far different than the drug trafficking they're talking about. You know what I mean? It's like intellectually dishonest the way in which, especially the federal government's, getting warrants and treating things as they are. But
they're trying to take otherwise law-abiding citizens who are permitted for their activity and operating under normal business practices, and they're trying to apply laws designed to bust either street drug dealers or drug kingpins. And it harkens back to the IRS 501c3 debacle that's happening, where they're not only are we targeting dispensary operators, owners, nonprofits that are focused on cannabis policy reform via the IRS, and we don't know how egregious this is because nobody is actually tracking what the heck the IRS is doing. And there's a history of the IRS affecting political speech and momentum by their auditing activities. So we've got a preponderance of these types of institutions being audited in the first place, being quote-unquote randomly targeted, because we're randomly targeting 80% of the industry. And yet, once you're audited, they're applying what's called the 280E rule, where it's literally entrapping cannabis business owners, law-abiding citizens, into rules designed for drug kingpins. They're saying that as a business operator, you cannot take normal business deductions like overhead, your staff, health care, rent, the types of things that no business can survive in America without deducting. And so you couple that with the attack via banking systems and credit card companies, turning this into a cash-only industry, which is very unfortunate because, I mean, let's tiptoe into reality. You want to track something, put it on a credit card. You want to make sure that you don't track it at all, turn it into cash. It's the antithesis of logic for me, but they're putting pressure on banks so that you can't have a normal banking relationship, which then, of course, makes things like payroll and simply paying your taxes not only nearly impossible, especially in states that only take wire transfers for taxes. California Board of Equalization had to actually change the way they took money because of this so that they could take actual money. But in addition to that, it's forcing people into business practices that then look like money laundering. Because you're having to do everything in cash and make these. So it really is a multi-directional attack on, like I said, law-abiding citizens. You add to that the attack as a normal citizen to say that you can't even have a gun. I mean, at what point does the NRA? This is the only time I've ever not heard the NRA complain that someone was trying to take away gun rights. So it's across the board. So we're disarming them and forcing them into cash situations, and it's.
Well, let me ask
scary.
you this. So I could see, you're even pre-breakup, and if I understood things, there was an LLC, the Oaksterdam section, and maybe there was a dispensary, maybe there was some growing of plants. Those were all not for-profit companies. Is that the way that? I mean, I've always seen California as being a much more not-for-profit organization and kind of doing business as opposed to Colorado.
Colorado's for-profit. The 2008 Attorney General guidelines suggest that you need to be nonprofit in order to not be, in a per se guilt situation as far as having a storefront. The thing is it was not ensconced anywhere in our law that you had to be nonprofit. So this is an interpretation that's yet to be challenged. The reality is that
it's an advisory opinion by the Attorney General, but it's some input with some guidance, and I always refer to
the unfortunate part, though, is that you can't actually receive tax-exempt status federally. So the state is again setting you up to fail by saying you need to be nonprofit, but the IRS will never grant nonprofit status to someone who's aiding and abetting a felony. So we put people in a catch-22.
Well, that's
so
my
OU was not for profit, but we were not nonprofit, and we are now a corporation.
Do you think the better approach, just generally, if not for Oaksterdam in general, but some of the other entities that have thrived in California's, medical cannabis community, and there's a number of them, that have become, internationally renowned. Do you think they would have been better off, or California would have been better off in general as being a for-profit entity like Colorado and moving towards a more regulated? Go ahead.
I do. I really do. This is the only industry that I'm aware of in this country that is required to be nonprofit. Every industry is for profit in this country, and so by relegating people to a certain set of rules, it's also almost instigating failures because of some of the things that I've already described. But just tiptoeing towards a for-profit industry, it doesn't. Competition can be good. If you have people competing for quality medicine, for making sure that their staff is the best educated and the environment is one that you want to walk into, they're creating, places of choice, places that you would want to send your grandma. And a lot of times you can't ever quite achieve that in a nonprofit setting. It's extremely difficult to pull anything off in a nonprofit setting, especially if you're not recognized as nonprofit federally. You're just acting like one on a state level. So I don't fear a for-profit market. I think that we have to protect our for-profit market to ensure that we allow for small businesses, for family business, that it not become a monopoly of, three large companies. But I'm not, at the same time, afraid of Philip Morris coming in and taking over. I'd be more concerned about not setting some GMO laws early on here and maybe some non-advertising laws so that we know that we're not targeting children, because that is the main concern, especially for mainstream moms. And it's a valid concern. And so as long as we put into place those things that we have learned from the past, either through be it tobacco or alcohol type regulation or just simply healthcare regulation, that we do it right this time, that we have an opportunity to do it right.
Yeah,
and frankly, we have an opportunity to have safer communities if we bother to try.
Yes. I mean, we talk about this a lot because Michigan's in a weird position compared to California, Colorado, and, even like Washington, D.C. at this point. And, of course, I think, the local activists, statewide, there's a lot of very good, directions that the community is moving. I think, there's a majority of the state obviously is in favor of reform, and there's been a bunch of initiative. And the whole program's there to, the goal of trying to have some kind of reform in the next 2 to 4 years, some kind of state where there's actually a decriminalization bill that's pending from a Representative Jeff Irwin out of Ann Arbor area. But, there are things that we, can see nationally that have assisted to some of the states being more progressive, in terms of their overall vote. I mean, I'm speaking of Colorado, and I just, forget the way and, the backdrop to it. I just see, obviously you kind of identified the concerns of like just a few large scale growing becoming the way, that we still would prefer the caregiver system of people growing in their, their own individual boutique, what have you, as being the, main source to which any center would be being provided, and not cut those individuals out of the the marketplace, so to speak. But with that being said, and somehow being able to retain that, the revenue that's being generated in the organization and the what to me just seems to be a shutting up of a law enforcement community because they have been paid off, so to speak. Like the revenue is paying their kids' schools and their overtime, and they can drive by these places and not be overly concerned, which I think is just an advancement evolutionary that, is going to be a challenge for our state, is a challenge for our state, and is just, one of the main factors in moving it along. What are your thoughts on that? If that made sense.
Well, and I want to, you're talking about more Michigan, and I'm sorry, I have to apologize. My husband walked in with my son wondering if I was done. So I got slightly distracted there. I apologize. This is a family business after all. It has to be. When the raid happened, I became a working mom, literally, bring the kid to work with me mom. I hope he doesn't disrupt the class. Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is the feds seem to have. I mean, I know they're still in Colorado, but they seem to have had their hands off a little bit. When I think of Colorado positively, that model, I don't. I think that the negative of it is that you've got these large scale grows which seemingly compete with the mom and pop growers. And in an ideal world, you want, Michigan. I've always been an advocate for those entities, the people growing in their basements being the, sole suppliers of the marketplace. They exist, and there needs to be more of them to facilitate that. So if you put that into the Colorado model or somehow maintain that, what I'm saying is what I see in Colorado is the following: that the law enforcement community, federally and at the state level, has had more of a hands-off approach because of some of these regulations, because there's some controls that have put them at ease in what would normally be their own desires to want to shut them down, and that they've been...
There are federal agents that have flat out said that if California would put statewide regulations in place, then they would not be getting attacked the way that they are. And then the second anyone tries to do state regulations, the feds come in and threaten them not to do state regulations. I just want to point that out, too. So I agree with you that Colorado and Washington are not getting messed with immediately because they have the statewide regulatory process in place. And I will say that Colorado's is cumbersome, and there's a lot of things that they tried to institute in Colorado that never even got instituted, like the live camera feed. Because there's no way they're going to have enough officers to stare at plants grow. We're talking about grass growing. We're paying cops to watch grass grow, really, literally. Right. So, that is a little on the ridiculous side.
But wait.
On the other side, though...
Just on that one point, though, see, I'm not an advocate of that because that is, to me, this is a critical point of all of it, because the concern is always going to be on the law enforcement side that whoever's growing it is selling it illegally out the back door. That's just always going to be the way it is. That's just the way that they're trained, and that protocol in Colorado was a suggestion, a solution for that concern that's never going to go away. And it may have been
a very, very expensive solution that could have been solved with bills of lading and in-out audits. My point is that there's ways to do that without it being so cumbersome, and what that just did was eat into the profit margin that Colorado will see. And we're already hearing sniping about, oh, where's all the money that we were supposed to make on this marijuana program? So we've got to be careful that we don't, shoot ourselves in the foot as promising economic boom and then basically implementing a program that's a bust. And that's actually the concern up in Washington, is that they're going to overtax it to the point of actually creating a secondary black market, because they're going to make it so cumbersome and difficult to actually participate in the legal market that there's going to be actually a dual black market. You're going to have the pre-market and the post-market. And frankly, I think what we really need to do is start having the conversations with our soccer moms that even if, look, there's lots of ways that we can prevent pounds going out the back door. But let's just have a conversation about marijuana prohibition and regulation in the first place, because right now it's more available than ever because it's not being sold and regulated in these stores. And these stores are IDing to make sure they're not selling to your children. And dude behind the convenience store isn't doing that. And so even that pound that goes out the back door is still, still safer. In many ways. It's unfortunate to actually say this, but I have to, just as a mother. I would rather my kids stumble across a marijuana edible than a bottle of aspirin, because the bottle of aspirin will kill him. So we have to just tiptoe into the reality that cannabis is simply not as dangerous, and the dangerous part is the prohibition of it. Nobody takes out, Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch don't take out Uzis on street corners to fight about turf wars. They take out advertising, and that's managed by laws. And that's what we need to get back to.
I agree with you. Listen, I just want to be clear. I was not advocating for that kind of regulation. I'm saying that whatever that is and how they came up with it, and I'm looking at this from a criminal defense standpoint, because I do see this being a, freedom issue to a certain degree, interaction between government and this is, but what I'm suggesting is that, there was whatever they did, whatever it is, they came up with X, but that had a way at least of changing some of the perception in the way in which law enforcement was viewing what they normally did not.
Oh, heck yes, and let me agree with you on that let's not let good be the enemy of great. That as long as we're moving the ball down the field, we will eventually, score the goal that we're all looking for, which is the end of marijuana prohibition. And I would rather settle for a crappy law that puts less people in jail and allows for some medical access than no law that forces cops to treat cannabis as contraband. And that's this is the first time in history in 80 years that law enforcement officers can treat marijuana as a commodity rather than contraband. And what you just pointed out, we now have ex-DEA agents and ex-law enforcement officers or current law enforcement officers who are suddenly on the marijuana task force, and they're realizing that this really isn't all that bad. In fact, and this is part of it too, is, it's fear of losing jobs. It's not just about the profit margins on marijuana or the illegal sales or the black market. It's that, the same reason that marijuana became illegal in the first place was there was a group of people terrified after the first failed prohibition ended, alcohol prohibition, that they have all these federal agents that are about to be laid off because they have nothing to do. And so let's look for something to do. Well, the drug war surge, except it's not really one because not enough people are addicted, but if we lump marijuana in and then lie to the doctors and say, no, it's not the cannabis you prescribe, it's marijuana, it's that crazy devil weed from Mexico. No, farmers, it's not the hemp you've been growing and selling for centuries. it's this scary marijuana drug, and thereby, changing the last 80 years of history.
You're listening to Planet Green Trees. We're on with the Chancellor of Oaksterdam and owner now of Oaksterdam, Dale Sky Jones from Oakland, California.
Indeed.
Let's see, I think we have a guest is that you, Tim Beck?
Oh, wonderful. Tim has taught for me. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Dale. Oh, gosh, good to hear your voice. I just want to say you and Michael, you've been both, very, very eloquent on this whole issue. You've really cut to the chase here. I got a question for you, Dale, and it's a thing we're facing here in Michigan. I guess the situation in California is that the state Supreme Court ruled that local communities can, either have, marijuana, dispensaries, facilities, whatever, or they don't have to. And I mean, from reports I get from California, it seems to be there just seems to be a lot of chaos and problems and lawsuits and this and that. Now, there is a bill in the Michigan House right now that does appear to have a good chance of passing. I would say probably by the end of 2014. But that is specifically, it gives the local community, county, city, whatever, the right to either have dispensaries, let's use that term, or not. It's up to them. And so there's some places in Michigan that are very open. They're real happy about something like that. Others they're also happy because they don't have to have one in their community. I mean, looking at that bill, it's probably the only thing that has a possibility of becoming legal through the legislature. I mean, looking back on California, could you shed some light? I mean, do you think this is the wave of the future?
I think I think it's actually a fantastic way to move forward, Tim, and this is how we, those history buffs out there, this is how we disassembled alcohol prohibition with state by state, county by county. You had wet counties and you had dry counties, and some whole states stayed dry for decades after alcohol prohibition ended. But it also meant that some states ended their own state prohibition prior to the feds doing it. In fact, California did it about a year prior to the end of federal prohibition, and New York did it a full decade. They said, we're not going to waste our local resources on your failed federal policy. Now, so that's the big picture, but then you tiptoe with a finer point, as Tim said, with this local control issue. Look, local control is good. We've been dealing with things like where to put what. I was talking about the NIMBY issues, not in my backyard. But by and large, these decisions are always have been ensconced in local control. And so allowing the locals to choose for themselves what goes where. And what starts to happen is those communities that decide to allow it start enjoying a wonderful economic boom. Oakland revitalized its downtown with its marijuana industry. It reopened the historic Fox Theater. We were able to avoid laying off something like 80 cops during the height of the economic problems. And so other communities looked over and said, wait a minute, you mean if I just do this and then start taxing and then charging for permitting? In both Oakland and our neighboring Berkeley, the number 2 tax revenue producer and the number 1 tax revenue producer for towns like Sebastopol is its dispensary. Wrap your brain around that for a minute and how many cops we're keeping on the street. And so these are little itty-bitty experimental units that are spread out throughout Michigan or California where we can start to hash out, pardon the pun, best practices. What works, what doesn't, what not to do. I remember joking with the Michiganders when I first came out, because when we go to another state, we completely rewrite the program for that state with that state's locals, because you guys know the spirit and the letter of your law better than anyone. And so it's really about what each individual does want in their backyard. And then it's up to us as individuals to show them what's in it for them. Hey, community, here's why you might want to have a dispensary. And it often takes years. It's going to be a bloody fight. It's not going to happen overnight. But eventually enough people start showing up to these city council meetings and saying, look, it's me. I'm Larry. I'm the guy that's run the hardware store for 40 years. You trust me, don't you? I'd like to open up the next cannabis dispensary. Oh, Larry, we trust you. It's those crazy drug dealers we don't know. Well, you will work on permitting. And so this starts to happen over time. And the number one decider for individuals in every poll I've looked at, do you know someone? Do you know someone who consumes cannabis, either for medical reasons or otherwise? And if you do, it's just like the issue with the LGBT community. It changes hearts and minds. They realize, oh gosh, you're not a scary, stupid stoner. You're the same guy I've known and loved for years, and you happen to smoke pot. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. And so what we need, gentlemen, is a coming out campaign.
Very well. So listen, we got about 8 minutes left. You're listening to Planet Grangers. The call number is 1347.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you so much for that answer. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, well, I wanted to ask another question if you didn't want to go. I just wanted to just got about 8 minutes left, and I want to just do the one stop in here. But tell me this, Dale. There's a lot of activity now with different forms of companies that are developing on the stock market. There's a lot of discussion of penny stocks and different kind of industry products that are being developed. Is that something that you see as a positive for the community as a whole? And what do you see as its successes moving forward, as a factor in the medical cannabis or cannabis community?
Well, in the near term, I would just simply say buyer beware. There's still a lot of scams out there, and some of the scams are intentional, and some of them are honest to goodness. They just don't know any better. They don't realize they can't sell their dispensary because of the local law not allowing that transfer. So, especially in these early stages, you've got to educate yourself. If somebody says, let me show you, there's a way to do it, be very suspicious of that, because there's no one way to do it. There's best practices, there's what not to do, and there's a path somewhere in between based on your responsibilities in life. Do you have a family and a farm you're trying to, support, or are you a single guy in an apartment? It's what do you have to lose, and who are you going to affect by your decisions? And so it's that's first and foremost, because I am distrustful of a lot of the get rich quick, penny stock, all this stuff, But on that same token, a lot of these companies are right on the money and a little before their time. And so everything seems right, but the federal law is still wrong. And so what is logical and normal business practices, you just go ahead through the looking glass, because nothing is quite as it should be once you enter the cannabis industry. And so you've got to educate yourself. That being said, it's going to take the interest of Wall Street. It's going to take the interest of investors. It's going to take the interest of the same people that hand millions of dollars to politicians to convince them that this does need to change. Follow the money, money talks. And right now, all the money is saying keep marijuana illegal. The prison industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, the beverage industry, the drug testing industry. There's so many people making money on the illegality of marijuana that we have got to start showing people where the money is on the legal side, on taxes for towns and for education for our children. We have to show people what's in it for them. And frankly, this is just influence research, my friend. There's two things that we have to illustrate to the general public at large for this to really work. We have to prove to them that it's worth it and that they can do it. And if we don't illustrate those two things, this law will never change.
Very well said. Let me ask you one final question, because we only have about 4 minutes left.
Yeah, my husband will be mad at me too. Yep.
You know, from the Midwest, and I've spent some time in California at various times of my life, you got to figure that pretty much everybody is in favor of marijuana by now. Is that true? I mean, who are the opponents at this stage? Are there, like, what are the percentages of people that are in favor of medical versus legal, and why are there even any, you know, where's the state at?
Well, you know, what's remarkable is we've seen a tremendous swing just in the last 2 years. We're kind of on a track that is similar to gay rights in this country, that it just has taken off, where 20 years ago you would never have thought it possible, and now it seems like within the next 2 years anything is possible. And in fact, by 2016, it looks like there's going to be approximately 17 more states joining the ranks through either a voter initiative or legislative process.
Woo-hoo.
So, yeah, those are some mighty big numbers that are going on now. And so, with respect to the polling, it's actually kind of funny to see that a lot of the concerns even 2 years ago have been largely dissuaded. The sky has not fallen. And we still have great concern amongst mothers, amongst women. We're still trying to discern the differences or the similarities between, say, Latina mothers and white mothers, because there's been, for many years, a constant bombardment to communities, black and brown communities, that the drugs have ruined your community. And the reality is the drug laws have ruined your community. The stop and frisk and the incarceration of 40% of your black fathers, that is what has destroyed these communities. But in many respects, you still believe it. You still believe the hype. We're still part of the DARE generation. And so I think the most important conversation to have at this point is with your mother. Go talk to your moms, talk to your sisters who are moms, and help explain that their kids are actually safer in a regulated environment, so that you can have an honest conversation about when to consume cannabis and when not to consume cannabis. And there's a time and a place for everything. It's called college. You shouldn't do it while you're young. And here's why, unless you're sick. I think we've lost the ability to have these honest conversations with our kids. And frankly, our kids are losing faith in their parents when they say methamphetamines or heroin or crack if it's just as bad and nothing bad happened when I smoked pot, well, let's go ahead and try some of that meth. The street drugs that are coming in to replace cannabis, which is the safest therapeutic substance known to man, spice is not. And spice is what's on the street right now because cannabis is illegal. And so I think that moms are the conversation. That's the 10% that needs to swing. And, we still need to have conversations with cops, but we got to realize that these folks are sworn to uphold these laws and can't speak out against their own, their paycheck. And so it's going to be the retired cops and judges that have been on the front lines for 40 years that are going to be having those conversations, and we should support that. And meanwhile, anyone interested in learning more, I encourage it, Oaksterdam.com. I hope that more people will educate themselves and start having this conversation and come out to their friends and their family and say, look, I smoked pot once. I'm okay.
There you go. And you know what? I don't know if you still retain the title, but I'm going to call you the Chancellor, because the information and the way in which you presented was very, very informative, and I feel that everyone really learned from. And I feel like we could talk for hours. I enjoyed talking to you. We're going to have you back on, but thank you very much for all your time and insight to this, obviously, a paradigm shift of what's happening in the United States. And thanks again, everybody. That's been our Chancellor Dale Sky Jones, from the owner of Oaksterdam. Look forward to hearing great things from you. Thank you.
Thank you. We do intend to make some more news. You guys have a great night. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, you too. Good night.